Our Heavenly Father, in Jesus' name, we ask for your mercy and grace as we talk together now. Your word says if we lack wisdom, we can ask you. And we do often lack it, particularly in our family lives. Sometimes we lack courage. And therefore we pray for your gracious help. In Jesus' name, amen. I hope we're going to have some chance for questions and what have you. But I remember writing that book, The Heart of Success. I wrote it in a garden shed. And the only book I've ever written that I finished writing it before I ever approached a publisher. So no contract was signed for it. I just wrote it. I wrote it out of a heart for people, I think, who had lots of stuff but had missed out on life. That book has taken me all around the world. Just 2 years ago, the president of Swaziland invited me to have an hour with him and his whole cabinet. So I had an hour with the president of Swaziland and the whole cabinet on the heart of success. Shortly just before that, I was in Cape Town speaking to 120 people from the Young Presidents Association. These are men and women who are under the age of 50 and have a turnover of at least $50 million. And I spoke to them about some of the things I'd written about in the heart of success. I talked about mistakes I'd made when my kids were small. I think I might have recited that old little song that I put in the book, The Heart of the 60-Minute Father. My child arrived the other day. Came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away, and as he grew, he said, "I'm going to be like you, Dad, I'm going to be like you." And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you're coming home, Dad, I don't know when, but we'll get together then, son. We'll have a good time then. My boy turned 10 the other day. He said, "Thanks for the ball, Dad. Come on, let's play. Would you teach me to throw?" I shook my head and walked away, but his smile never dimmed. It said, "I'm going to be like him. I'm going to be like him." He came home from college the other day, so much like a man, I just had to say, "Son, I'm proud of you. Would you sit for a while?" He shook his head and said with a smile, "What I'd really like, Dad, is to borrow the car keys. Could I have them, please?" "When you coming home, son?" "I don't know when, but we'll get together then, Dad. We'll have a good time then." And I've long since retired, and my son's moved away. I called him up the other day, said, "Love to see you, Dad, if you don't mind." He said, "Love to, Dad, if I could find the time, but the new job's a hassle and the kids got the flu. But it's been nice talking to you, Dad. It's been lovely talking to you." And as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me he'd grown up just like me. My boy was just like me. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. "When you're coming home, Dad, I don't know when, but we'll get together then, son. We'll have a good time then." Somebody said that with regard to our children's lives, the days are long, but the years are short. If your kids are grown, don't go on a great guilt trip. Some of you want to have kids, I understand that, but a great guilt trip, mine are grown, gone. I'm a grandfather now. I like being a grandfather. Frankly, if I'd known grandkids were so much fun, I'd have had them first. Tony Campolo said, "Grandchildren are God's reward for not killing your kids." But, you know, I shared some of that stuff with those business people. And when I finished, a man came up to me, a multi-millionaire. He might have been a billionaire, to be honest with you. And the tears were streaming down his face, about 60 years old. And he said, "Where were you 20 years ago? Where were you 20 years ago?" And see, that's the difficulty of courage in the family, isn't it? It's that when we're younger, the rules are easy. When they're young, the rules are easy. You just have to do this and do that and try and achieve this and make this. And so often it's like that. And very often I meet men particularly who say to me, "You know what, when I've done this and when we've done that, we're going to have more time." I told those guys this story, and it's a true story, that when Lloyd was a little boy, both they're grown now, but when was Lloyd's a little boy, he'd come into the bathroom 7 o'clock in the morning and say, "Dad, tell me a story while you're shaving." It was the last thing I wanted to do. Senior partner, busy law practice, leader in a local church, preaching all over the place, just a million things going around my head. But I used to kind of tell him this story, and we call them shaving tales. Every morning we did that, day in, day out, week in, month out, down the years. Until one cold November morning, Lloyd didn't come. And I can remember shouting over the banister, Lloyd, do you want a shaving tail? And he said, Dad, I'm playing with Katie. Can we have one tomorrow? There never was another shaving tail. That little door of childhood just closed. And once it closes, no power on earth can open it again. If I may say to those of you whose kids are grown, what I said a moment ago, don't go on some great guilt trip. It's never too late to begin a relationship. And sometimes that needs courage. A relationship's gone. Nobody's told me about you. I know nothing about any of you, as far as I know, in detail anyway. One or two friends in the audience, but largely none of you. But some of you might have grown children, and you're alienated from them. And it will need courage often to build that. I came across a man once who said to me, I have never apologized to my kids for anything, nor would I apologize for anything. Hey, you can fear a man like that, but it's hard to have a relationship with him. If your kids are grown, it's never too late to begin to build a relationship. But if you have little ones, let me say what others may have said to you. They will be grown and gone before you know it. And remember this. A slower day is not coming. You know, people say, when I've done this, when I've achieved this, when the church has grown, when we've done that. Sometimes people used to say to me, well, what about Jesus' command to love him more than your family? Listen, guys, whatever that means, it cannot mean neglecting those for whom we have primary responsibility. Whatever it means, it can't mean that. And I would often say yes to the whole world. Rob, can you speak here? Yes. Can you do this? Yes. Can you sit on this? Yes, yes, yes. Like a little boy with a bag of sweets in a playground. If I give you all my sweets, if I say yes to everything you ask me to do, will you love me? But that doesn't take courage. That's not courageous family. That's not being courageous as a man. That's just doing what everybody does, trying to please the whole world. And what I discovered was actually I was saying no so often to those for whom I did have primary responsibility. A woman came up to me some time ago. She said, my husband's very busy. You know, I'll never forget Diane leading a seminar in Spring Harvest for church leaders, spouses, and she was speaking to women. So she had a whole group of women whose husbands were church leaders. It could have been the other way around, I understand that, but she had a whole group and she was talking to these women about the pressures of church leadership. And a little girl put up her hand at the back. She was about 12 years old, and she said, could I ask a question? And Diane said, yes, my little dear, what's your question? She said, why don't I ever see my dad? Why don't I ever see my dad? And I was saying yes to the whole world and no to those for whom I had primary responsibility. Somebody said to me, and this takes guts and it takes courage, and Jesus was courageous. They said to me, he did all he did in 3 short years because he did what Father told him to do. And that gave him the incredible freedom to have the courage to do what we cannot often do, to say no. Will you be our king? No. Will you settle this dispute between my brother and I? No. Can we go back to this village? They want us there. No, we're going on. He had this incredible sense of what he was meant to be saying yes to. And that gave him the incredible freedom sometimes to say no. When I was about 33, I suppose, I was asked to give a seminar in Scotland on the family. Nigel Cameron, the theologian and academic, was speaking for 3/4 an hour. I was speaking, various other people were speaking, 300 doctors and social workers, and my wife Diane said to me, can I come and say something? I said, darling, you've never spoken in public. How on earth would you do it? She said, I think I'll be fine. So I rang the organizers up and said, can my wife say something? And they said, sure. Would she like to speak for 10 minutes? I said, 10 minutes will be fine. But I didn't tell them she'd never spoken in public. So Nigel Cameron speaks with 3/4 an hour. I speak with 3/4 an hour. Doctors, social workers. And then I said, now will you welcome my wife, Diane? Pretty brave of me, to be honest, I thought. I will never forget what Diane said. Diane has spoken to tens of thousands of women since then. I last heard her say what she said that afternoon in front of 2,000 women in the brand new Waterfront Hall in Belfast. This is what she said. It was a lovely October morning. The sun was streaming through the curtains. In so many ways, life was perfect. I had a brand new baby boy. I had a little girl, 3 years old. I'd had a lovely home. Lying next to me was my husband who loved me. The only problem was, I just whispered to Rob, darling, I don't think I can cope anymore. Would you take Katie to nursery today? Guys, I remember Diane saying those words as though it were yesterday. As though it were yesterday. And if I thought that was going to be sorted out that day, that week, that month, that year, I was wrong. Those words ushered in years of darkness for Di and I. Her immune system crashed. Di experienced something of a depressive illness. They were dark times. But I learned lessons during those times that really were the foundation for care for the family. You see, guys, sometimes those of us who live lives at 1,000 miles an hour, we do pretty well. But those around us pick up the cost. Those around us pick up the cost. But that doesn't take courage. It doesn't take courage to run around just doing everything people ask you to do, but to honestly say to God, Father, help me know what you want me to do. I think Di was picking up the results sometimes of my crazy lifestyle. And what a strange thing. Here am I preaching sermons, helping people, counseling others, helping them, all this stuff. And my own wife said, darling, I'm really struggling right now. It takes courage to change that kind of thing. Let me just share another area with you, because as I was thinking about speaking to you briefly this afternoon, and I'll stop talking as soon as I can, and we'll have some questions, because I really would love to talk about things that you would like to talk about. But I was trying to think about some things. In Courageous Family, what do we need courage for? And I think we need courage for what I've just talked about, trying to live in a different way. Because as guys, particularly, our egos are strong. Our egos are very strong. And we want to be thought of well. We want to say yes to the whole world. And you know the funny thing about kids? They don't have the clout that clients and customers and even friends have. So they're very easy touches to say, we'll do it later. We'll do it later. You know, guys, your kids will forget the expensive presents you bought them. I hope you know that. They'll forget the plasma television. They'll forget that bike with 47 gears on it. Do you know what they'll remember? They'll remember the night you camped in the garden with them when they were 8 years old. And at midnight, you were both so scared you came in. When I wrote the book, The 60-Minute Father, and that book sold 250,000 copies around the world in 20 different languages. So when I wrote that book, I wrote in it about what I called our family nights when my kids were small. They used to, once a week, drag their mattresses into our bedroom, and they'd sleep in our bedroom. That was called a family night. Once a month, we'd drag our mattresses downstairs, all of us, and sleep on the lounge floor. And we'd light the fire and eat chocolate and listen to story tapes. Now, because that book sold all over the world, I've had families in many different cultures all over the globe dragging mattresses downstairs. So a couple of years ago, I turned up to do a seminar in Canada, I think it was, and I walk in this 2,000-seat auditorium, and there's a guy waiting to speak to me. He says, "You're Rob Parsons, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Well, I did the whole super family night thing. We dragged our mattresses downstairs. I have 4 kids. We listened to story tapes. We had the fire on. We had chocolate." He said, 3 of my kids threw up all over the mattresses. And the 4th one threw up in my car on the way to church. And I thought he was angry with me, and then he smiled. And he said, "But it was worth it." Do you know, guys, when I speak to people in their 20s, early 30s, and I say to them, "What made family life sweet for you?" They never, ever mention money. Never. They never, ever mention, and I've been doing this for a quarter of a century, nobody's ever mentioned an expensive holiday, an expensive suit or clothes or dress, or they so often begin with these words, we always. And they'll begin to talk about some silly tradition of family life. We always did this. One of my best friends died alcoholic. Bless him. Bless him. Some of you guys might be drinking a bit too much, and it would be good to try to stop it if you can. Stop. A friend of mine stops a day a week, and a week a month, and a month a year. But my dear friend was an alcoholic, and I saw him bloated and dying and gasping for breath, and I loved him. In fact, I kissed him just before he died. And I went to see his two girls. They were almost 30. And I knew him as a friend, but I didn't know him as a dad, and they wanted me to speak at his funeral. He was a musician. Do you know what was on Frank Sinatra's tombstone, by the way? Anybody guess what was on Frank Sinatra's tombstone? I did it my way. Well, I thought so too, but that's not what's on Frank Sinatra's tombstone. On Frank Sinatra's tombstone, apparently, is the best is yet to come. Isn't that interesting? And my friend was a musician, and I talked about that, and the best was yet to come, because he had faith. He kind of lost it a little bit as he went on, but he might have lost his hold on God, but I don't think God lost his hold on my friend. Anyway, I'm talking to his daughters, and I say, tell me about your dad. And they said, oh, Dad was crazy. Every Saturday night, he'd insist on doing the cooking. And he was a hopeless cook. And he'd put a funny apron on, and he'd speak in a French voice. And we'd say, what are we going to eat tonight, Dad? And he would say, Edna never tells. We couldn't work out how the French cook was called Edna. And some nights, he'd shut the kitchen door, and we'd smell smoke. And then we'd hear the car start up. And we'd know that for that night at least, it was fish and chips. And their dad's gone. And they're almost 30 years old. And I say, what made your family life sweet? And they tell me about a silly apron and a French accent and a dad who couldn't cook. And they say, we always. The Bible talks about that. It says, when you walk along the road, tell your children this. Write the laws above your doorpost. Tell them, not the big deal, just the ordinary little things, I was talking to a very sophisticated young woman, a young lawyer in her early 30s, not long ago. And again, I said, what made your family life sweet? What are your memories? And she blushed. She said, oh, no. And I said, come on, tell me. Oh, she said, I used to wait for Dad to come home. I was about 4 years old. And he'd sit in the same chair. And I said, Daddy, can I sit on your lap? And he'd say, no, you cannot. Only girls with black hair can sit on my lap. Daddy, I've got black hair. Well, only girls with black hair and blue eyes can sit on my lap. Daddy, I've got blue eyes. Well, only kids with black hair and blue eyes and pink shoes. And pretty soon, a little girl with black hair and blue eyes and pink shoes and a dozen other things would climb onto her father's lap, and when she was old, she still remembered it. So why am I telling you these silly stories? Because many men, me included, don't have either the wisdom or the guts or the courage to understand that generally in family life, it's not the big things that matter. It's the little things. It's not having everything that we want. It's understanding the needs of people, our wife, our husband. Guys, let me talk to you personally about us as men, if I may. Do you know, it's very easy to say things from up here. Very, very easy to say things from up here. I was in Spring Harvest years ago, and a very famous guy came to me, and he said, you know what, Rob? He said, years ago, he said, I used to be a Baptist minister, he said, and he said, I brought all my church to Spring Harvest, and they went to hear this guy, another very quite famous speaker, and he said, they came back to me, and they said, oh, this guy's an amazing Christian. And he said, I found that a bit threatening, because I was their church leader. He's an amazing Christian. Do you know what he does? He gets up at 5:30 every morning. 5:30. And he goes into his study. And he reads kind of magazines from around the world. And then he reads the word for about 45 minutes. And then he prays for about 45 minutes. And then he makes his family breakfast. And as the smell of bacon's upstairs, his kids are running downstairs. They hold hands, they say grace, they pray around the table together. And he said, Rob, he said, when I listened to this, I was so condemned I tried to do it. He said, but I couldn't get up at 5:30. But for the last, he said, 8 years, I've managed to get up at 5:45. And I've done it. 5:45 every morning. And he said, the other day I was speaking at his church. And they invited me back to lunch. And he said, he was in the kitchen and his wife was kind of laying the table. And she said to me, I'll make up his name, Jacob, we want to know how you do it. You're so busy, you achieve so much. And he said, well, actually, I get up every morning at 5:45. And he said, I was about to say, and I owe all that to your husband. But she interrupted me and shouted into the kitchen, do you hear that? You did that for a week. And sometimes preachers are like that, guys. You know, I was speaking in Glenwood Church, my own church the other day, and I spoke on debt and finance, pretty heavy stuff. And I sat down when I'd finished, and my wife Diane was sat next to me. And I said, how did it go? She said, I don't know. I couldn't stop laughing. I said, what do you mean you couldn't stop laughing? I was talking about debt and repossessions. She said, you've got odd shoes on. So I looked down and I have indeed got odd shoes on. They're both black and they both have toe caps. But the one on the left, I don't recognize. And I look down at this shoe and this shoe looks up at me. And then I realized what must have happened. My son Lloyd's a firefighter, and the previous night he'd been staying with us. We'd been watching Match of the Day. We kicked our shoes off under the coffee table. I dressed quickly for church. He was still in bed, and I got one of his boots on. Now, you all hope nobody will recognize you, don't you? But at the end, there's a long queue of people waiting to speak to me, the leading one of which said, it must be difficult, Rob, dressing in the dark. Preachers go through times when their marriages seem that they're going to fall apart. Dad and I have been married for 42 years. We've been through times in that where it seemed that love had died. There may be times ahead for us like that. I've often felt a failure as a father. I've often felt a rubbish Christian. Never mind giving seminars on courage, I felt I've lacked courage so much I needed an injection of the stuff. But the Bible says when we're weak, we're strong. When we understand that. And guys, what I want to just say to you very briefly, and then I want to take a couple of questions, and I got some stuff I want to share with you at the end. I just want to talk to you a little bit about the nature of love, if I can. Because it takes courage to understand the nature of love. Jesus talked about love in a very powerful, a very practical way. Do you know, I go to write my books in a little cottage overlooking Carmarthen Bay. And one day, about 3 years ago, I was walking on the beach, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And the sun was glistening on the sea, and the mountains looked great. And I come back up, and there's an old fisherman there. And I say to him, it's idyllic, isn't it? I don't know if he was just grumpy or tired of tourists, but he shouted at me, you should see it in January. And when I walked on the beach the next day, it was equally beautiful. The sun was glistening on the sea and the mountains looked great and the sand looked great. But I felt them whisper to me, will you love us in January? Would you love us in January? Shortly after that, I was invited to speak at a friend's daughter's wedding. It was an old Anglican church. The sun was streaming through the windows and the flowers looked beautiful. The bride looked fantastic. The bridegroom looked about as good as he's ever going to look in life. And I wondered whether I dare share with them what was on my heart. And suddenly, into this perfect day, the vicar read out the vows. And into this perfect day came warnings of darker times. She said, I will love you if we are wealthy. And he said, and if we are poor. She said, and if we are well. And he said, and if we are sick. Those vows dared to invade this perfect day with warnings of darker times. Will those vows ever be called in? Yes, they will. The young couple do not believe that. They say them sincerely, but they do not believe in their hearts those vows will ever be called in, but they will, as surely as night follows day. And that couple will have to work out whether they're going to have the courage to go on loving each other sometimes when love seems to have died. And I stand up and I tell them about January love. The Bible talks about love in incredible terms. I won't read it all to you guys, but it's hardly wishy-washy, is it? Love keeps no record of wrongs. Oh, you know it, don't you? Love keeps no record of wrongs. Love is not rude. Love is not self-seeking. Love is not arrogant. Love never fails. These are practical things. Shortly afterwards, I'm counseling a young couple. He's about 26. She's about the same age. She is cradling a little girl of 6 months old. And I say to him, why are you leaving your wife and your little girl? He says, because I don't feel in love anymore. When we got married, we were so in love. I felt so much, but I don't feel in love anymore. I said, did nobody tell you that this was normal? Did nobody tell you the feelings of love go up and down? Did nobody tell you often after the birth of a little child? Well, we're going into postnatal classes now in Care for the Family. 1 hour relationship course. What can you do in an hour? And I tell you, those courses are having a dramatic effect on reversing breakdown. Many couples break up within 3 years of the birth of a baby. We have 1 hour with these people. I say to them, did nobody tell you that after the birth of a little one, often the emotions go up and down a little? Did nobody tell you about January love? And he says to me, no, nobody told me that. And I look at this little girl, and she's 6 months old. And the first man in her life is about to walk out on her forever. And nobody told him that. But it will take courage for him to stay, won't it? Guts, grit, determination. Feelings are not going to keep him, are they? Because he don't feel in love. Sex is not going to keep him because at the moment it's probably not great, maybe non-existent. Ego's not going to keep him. There's not much ego about getting up, changing this little kid's bottom and making up the bottles. And no. Just about only one thing will keep him. Courage will keep him. The courage to say, this is my little girl. I'm her dad. I'm not saying that's always the right answer. But I'm telling you, staying together for the sake of the kids is not a bad reason. And many couples in doing so have discovered a love they thought was gone forever. But that is not just emotion, that's courage. Let me talk to you about something else. And forgive me if I offend you. But there'll be men in this auditorium now, and you're either in affairs, and there's only about 60 of you here, for goodness sake, or you're on the edge of an affair. You say to me, you have no idea what you're talking about. This is a courageous Christian men's conference. I know. I've been doing this long enough to know that what I said to you a moment ago is almost certainly true. It was spring at the time when kings go to war. And David was on the rooftop of his palace. And he sees a woman bathing, and he says, what's her name? Is not this Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sends for her, and she comes to him. A little later, she sends him a message. I'm pregnant. I worked for 20-odd years, shoulder to shoulder, jowl by jowl, with a man in the ministry to which I'm called. I spent more nights with that guy than I have with my own wife, I should think. We traveled the world together. And one day when life was a bit difficult for him, he began to look on the internet. It has cost him almost everything. Doesn't see his grandkids now. One of his own kids doesn't talk to him at all. And he told me that life was difficult for him right now. Marriage gone, ministry gone, life in tatters in some ways. And he said to me shortly afterwards, I have unleashed a tsunami. I've unleashed a tsunami. When was that tsunami unleashed? If there was a little door that you opened, when was that door opened that tsunami rushed through? And would he have unleashed the tsunami had he known? No, of course he wouldn't. Because that's not how affairs begin. If you're in an affair now or on the edge of it, you haven't got into it because you look at the future and see all that will happen. Listen, guys, and I mean this, I cannot tell you how strongly I mean this. This could happen to me tomorrow. People say you don't. Yes, I mean it, tomorrow. But I'll tell you, if anything keeps me from it, it will be seeing often what happens 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down the road. But it takes a bit of courage to think about that, because you don't want to think about it. Because you know what? When the affair begins, it's innocent. It's as if the price tag says free. It's just a little innocent. So if you're on the edge of an affair now, and I'll tell you what it will be, and I promise you nobody's told me about you, and I'm not exercising any great prophetic gift here, but you might have somebody you work with in church life, you know. She runs the Sunday school class, so she's a fellow youth leader with you, yeah? And you spend a bit of time with her, and it's nice, and it's all innocent, and you've got to go through the program, and you're doing this, and you're doing that, and pretty soon now she'll say to you, wow, Jack, you're so easy to talk to. You're such a great listener. Jack, has anybody told you what a great listener you are? Neither of them got the sense to work out if Jack's such a great listener, why isn't he home listening to his wife? But that's another story. You know, my Peter would never listen to me like that. And then Jack will say, have you had your hair cut? How did you notice that? Peter would have never noticed that. And in December, they'll climb into bed together. They'll still be running the church youth group when they climb into bed together. And in January, it will come out, and it is not impossible it will be redeemed. I have some very wonderful friends, and this takes almost as much courage in itself, who have known the redemption of coming back from that. It's not impossible, but the cost is always massive. The cost is always great. When did David fall into that affair, stuck on that rooftop? Did he fall into the affair when he climbed into bed with Bathsheba? No. Did he fall into bed when he sent Uriah into the heat of the battle, trying to get her husband killed? Did he fall when he actually murdered him? When did David fall into that affair? I'll tell you when he fell. He fell in the 10 seconds after he saw this incredibly beautiful woman, and he didn't have the guts to turn away. That's when he fell. In fact, he fell when he said, what's her name? To walk back then from those 10 seconds would have been relatively easy. And I'm telling you now, if you're on the edge of an affair now, and you've got this lovely woman, and she's great, and it's exciting, and it's all innocent, but you know there's more to it, it takes enormous courage to walk away from that. But I'm telling you, leave your church, leave your city, leave your country, fly with your family to the farthest corner of the earth, whatever it takes. Because I'm telling you, when you open that door, that tsunami will come through. Any of you know the theologian R.T. Kendall? Dr. Kendall, a grumpy old boy, he's a dear friend of mine. Dear friend of mine. But I managed to tell R.T. Kendall something about that little story that he first didn't believe. But he saw me a month ago and he said, Rob, I think you're right. You remember what happens, don't you? Uriah comes back and David says to him, now go home and sleep with your wife. And he says, no, the men are out there. I'm not going to sleep with my wife. And then he tries to get him drunk and go home and sleep with his wife. But he doesn't sleep with his wife. I said to R.T., do you know why he didn't do that, R.T.? He said, no, I don't know why. And R.T. knows everything. He knew. He knew, didn't he? He knew. And he thought, I'm stuffed if I'm going to go home and sleep with my own wife just so you can get off the hook. Now, kill me first. When you start the affair, the price tag is free. But as it moves through its various stages, the price goes up. It's as if somebody at the back of the shop is altering the price on the ticket, and one day you walk into that store and the price tag says, everything. You say, no, I didn't sign up for everything. Yes, everything. I want everything. It takes courage to turn your back on that. You know what people say to me sometimes when they hear me speak or they'll read one of my books? They say, Rob, you didn't tell us one thing we didn't know already, but you turned a light on for us. Courage. Now, there's something else I want to talk to you about before we go. We got about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to finish. But I'm desperate to talk about anything that you might want to talk about. So we've got a little mic here. So this is a seminar, not a lecture. So if you got any questions, I can only answer 3 questions because I only got 3 answers. But if you've got a question, yell it out, and I'll do my best, and we'll at least talk about it together. So is there anybody who's got a question about family life or courage in family life or try me on sport? If not, we'll go to the back there and then we'll come to you, sir. Yeah? So there's a guy at the back there and then to the front here. And then if there's somebody else, we'll come to you.
Hello?
Okay, go ahead.
I have a friend of a friend.
Yeah.
And there's been a separation. Husband lives in one country. Wife and children live in another country. What advice would you give?
Okay, so husband lives in one country. Wife and children live in another country. Okay, let's do the easier one first. The kids are separated from their dad. The proportion of children who, when their fathers leave, never ever see them again is staggering. A little girl, a woman recounted is there a bottle of water down there somewhere? Thank you. There's a woman recounted, oh thanks, I've got one, so sorry. There's a woman recounts the story of when her father, she was 8 years old, left home. She said, I was coming down the stairs and he's in the hallway of our home with his suitcase. And I said, Daddy, where are you going? He says, darling, your mum and I don't get on so well as we used to. I'm leaving now. But Daddy, where are you going? Well, I'm going to another city now. It's in America. But Daddy, will I ever see you again? Well, of course you will, darling. We'll get together at Christmas and Easter on holidays. But Daddy, why not more often? I doubt your mother will agree that, let alone more. Daddy, why do you have to go? Well, I found somebody else now. As I've said, your mum and I don't get along well together. Now go up to your bedroom now. No long goodbyes and no tears either. And she remembers walking up the stairs, and then she turned and remember saying this to him. Well, Daddy, she's 8 years old. I guess that's the way life goes sometimes. And he said, yes, darling, that's the way life goes sometimes. She said, from the day my father walked out that door, I never saw him again. So I don't know whether one walked out on the other in this situation, but the reality is this dad is separated from his kids. And so often fathers say to me, what can I do? What can I do? You know, I get certain visitation rights, I can do this, but there's very little. Sometimes there's a grandparent who will write to me, and that's even harder in some ways because they have no legal rights whatsoever. Unless they go to court in very unusual circumstances. What can you do? And do you know what I say to this dad often? I say, do what you can. Meet with these kids as often as you can. Write to them. This man is separated by an ocean. Keep writing to them. Never forget birthdays. Never forget Christmas. Send them presents. Even if the letters are sent back unopened. Even if your wife seems to be turning them against you, keep it going. Keep it going. Keep telling you love them. Keep that stuff going. Because what you're shooting for is when they're 19, 20 and they look back and say, you know, my dad never forgot a birthday. He never forgot this. He tried to keep the relationship going. He tried to do that. You're trying to keep the relationship going. There aren't easy answers. I see, listen, we have 85 people working care of the family. We're working on 50 different kind of strategies and locations and programs all over the country. I see enough pain in a week to last me a lifetime. There aren't easy answers, and there's certainly not an easy answer to this. But with regard to that dad and his kids, I would say keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. With regard to the marriage, well, that's much more difficult. And the reality is the chances of this marriage, especially at that distance, rediscovering its love is very, very small, but not impossible. And sometimes I've discovered the tiniest thing can make a difference. That's the remarkable thing I've discovered about working in care for the family. The tiniest thing can make the difference. You know, some years ago, I was speaking in a big auditorium, and as I walk in, I'm speaking on marriage. The steward says to me, there's a couple sat in the front row, they're about to have a divorce. We don't know why they've come to this event. We certainly don't know why they're sitting in the front row. This couple look as if they hate each other. Frankly, they look as if they hate me. They've separated the chairs so as far apart as they can from each other, loose chairs. They don't speak to each other. When other people go out in the coffee break, they stay there immobile. Seminar started at 7:30, finished at 10 o'clock at night. At 9:45, he suddenly reached out and took her hand. I watched as she pulled her hand back and then kept watching as she put her hand over his hand. And somebody said to me afterwards, are you about to tell me that a touch saved their marriage? I said, well, I don't know. But I do know this, that a marriage can go down in a spiral over the years. Sometimes not big things, not sexual abuse or violence, just 1,000 tiny hurts. And sometimes the tiniest thing can kick the bottom of that spiral and get it going up again. Sometimes something as small as a touch. Some of your marriages are in trouble, guys. They're in trouble. In fact, your wives don't think you love them anymore. And perhaps you don't. But I'm telling you this, sometimes the tiniest thing can alter that. We all want to change our wives. We want them to be sexier, thinner, taller, shorter. But you know the truth is, you can't change somebody else. But you can change yourself. And because change is dynamic, sometimes when we change, other people change. And when sometimes we do small things, instead of bringing them down, build them up. A touch, a thank you, tenderness. Not just tenderness because we're hoping we're going to get lucky, but just tenderness. Making somebody feel special. Sometimes the smallest thing. And it's not impossible that he would write a letter, and in the letter some small thing. So it's not easy. But sometimes the tiniest thing can change a relationship. What was your question, sir? Okay. All right. So what happens when kids suddenly go crazy? They hit those teenage years. And you know what? There are some guys here, and you've got 3 perfect kids. And I know that you think you're a fantastic father. But guys, trust me, you just got lucky. I would urge you not to have a 4th. What was that? It comes out in the grandkids, yeah. Well, honestly, guys, we had 2, and Katie was perfect, and Lloyd drove me crazy. And I remember when Lloyd was about 15, I'm in my study, as you all know, and I was beside myself. I've written 13 books on this stuff. I decided to reread everything I'd ever written on parenting, and none of it helped a jot. And then I came across something written by an old psychologist. This is what he said. He said, I think when a boy or girl hits 13, hormonal changes occur in their bodies which cause them to blast into outer space. They stop communicating, they grunt at you. He said, my advice to parents is just get them through those teenage years. Just get them through. Fight as few battles as you possibly can. And normally, when they're about 21, you'll start getting signals from out there. They're still alive. And most of them land. And my advice would be this. If you have more than one kid, you will almost certainly have a test in one. But you know, sometimes with that test in one, you have to do what Jesus did. You have to look at the heart. Sometimes those testing kids have wonderful hearts. It's true they hate church. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to offend any of you, but I've just written a book called Getting Your Kids Through Church Without Them Ending Up Hating God. A lot of 15-year-old boys don't like sitting still. And they don't much like listening to lectures. And they don't like reading. And they don't like singing. And when they're 14, they start coming to church and we say, now we want you to sit still and listen to lectures and sing quite a lot and read quite a lot, even in the youth Bible study. And when they're 16, they stop coming and we call them prodigals. But they weren't prodigals. They just couldn't sit still. Now, it's not that any of that would do them any harm. I spent all my life teaching the Bible. They need good Bible teaching. They need to worship. They need to read. It won't hurt them to listen to a couple of lectures. But those same kids may have a heart for the poor. When their mate got knocked off a motorbike, they were the first to visit them in hospital. Jesus said at the end of time, it won't matter to me that I was hungry and you fed me, I was naked and you clothed me, I was in prison and you visited me. And these kids score high on that. But we're too busy ticking all these other boxes. Sometimes looking over our shoulders, wondering what other people are making of our parenting. I'm telling you, some of you have grown kids. And the reason you've got a bad relationship with them is you've been more concerned about what others thought of them than what God thinks of them. And they've come to believe that God doesn't love them because they know how badly they've let you down. And they know that you're disappointed with them. They know that you've got this other child that is perfect and they're the kind of black sheep of the family. But you know, sometimes you have to look at their heart. And sometimes these people have wonderful hearts. Sometimes you have to catch your kids doing something right. I was talking to a woman some time ago. She said it was a Saturday night and I'm going to a prayer meeting at my church and my 18-year-old boy's going left into town on the bus. I'm going right to the prayer meeting and I know he's going to drink too much. And I'm going to be lying in bed at 1 o'clock in the morning waiting for his key in the door. And he buys a copy of Big Issue. And then he does something few adults do. He touches the guy's arm. And he says, keep the change, mate. And I say to her, wake him up tomorrow. Don't do it before 2 in the afternoon. But wake him up and tell him you were proud of him. It's the kind of thing Jesus would have done. I discovered as I went around the world with the Bringing Home the Prodigals message that many of our young people had not turned their back on God at all, but on something else. But on something else. What was that something? Ladies and gentlemen, the greatest gift in the world is love. But there is one more gift, and I'll end with this. And if we do not give this gift, a child, a wife, a friend, you will never believe that they are loved. It is the gift of acceptance. You might want your child to be somebody that they're not. You might want your wife to be something that she cannot be. You might want your friend to be something. Somebody might want you to be someone you just can't be. The gift of acceptance. I love you and I accept you. I illustrate this often by telling the true story of a woman of 40. She's attractive, she's slim, she looks half her age. And her daughter of 14 comes into the room, slightly overweight. And in my presence, this woman says to her daughter, do you know what, Sarah? I'm 40 and you're 14. And prodding her tubby stomach, she says, and I'm in better shape than you. Does that woman love her child? Yes, she does. She'd give her life for her. Does she accept her? No. And it'd be hard for that child to believe she is loved. Guys, let me tell you this. Can I please? God loves you. In Yancey's incredible words, nothing you do can make him love you more. Nothing you do can make him love you less. You are loved. You're not loved if you do everything that I say or anyone else has said today. You are loved. God loves you. Sir, God loves you. God loves you. You are loved. And when we grasp that, although it's very, very hard to grasp, because every other message in life tells us it cannot possibly be true. Of course you will love me if I pray for half an hour every day. Of course you will love me if I'm up to date with read the Bible in a year. Of course you will love me if but no. Those are good things, but I will love you anyway. I will love you anyway. When we grasp that, I think it puts courage in our heart to love others. Our wayward kids, the boy that's breaking our heart, the wife or friend that we don't feel that love for that we used to. It gives us courage to be different.